Hello and welcome to this gm-widgets coding session. In today's session we're going to be creating a basic checkbox user interface element that we can use to show and demonstrate how we can create widgets with this asset. So we're going to get right into it. First thing we want to do is we want to create our object for the checkbox. So obj checkbox. This object will be extending the obj GUI widget, which is one of the base objects that we can use for creating our GUI specific widgets. So once you've imported it, you'll see there's a bunch of events that are already being handled inside of our base events, and so we don't need to know too much about these right now, but we'll get into that soon. So the first thing we want to do is we want to inherit our create event, and it's very important that you choose inherit for this process because otherwise you're going to lose the functionality of your parent or the base class, and that will cause things to break. So once we have that sorted out, now we want to actually initialize our checkbox, our object, and so in here we're just going to make sure we have a state, so whether or not we're checked. We want to make sure that our image speed is set to 0, we don't want any animating, and then we've got to figure out what kind of mouse events we want to be using for a checkbox. So the standard mouse events that we're going to need are going to be the mouse event left press, and then we will also be using the mouse enter and the mouse leave. So the left press is pretty self-explanatory. It's whenever this widget is left pressed, we will perform some kind of an action, and then enter is when the mouse is entering this widget, and then when the mouse is leaving this widget. So those are the events that are registered there. So now that we have our mouse event here, let's go ahead and set up what we're going to be doing with our left press. So the way that this works in gm-widgets is that the events are delegated to the actual left press event in GameMaker, the native one. So all we need to do is we need to inherit this event, and the reason we want to inherit, and I would strongly advise you inherit on every time you extend any kind of widget, you want to make sure you're inheriting the functionality so that things don't break. If we override this, we can do that, and there may be special cases where we don't want the parent functionality, but it's strongly advised against because there's a lot of stuff happening internally that we might be expecting, and it will break if we don't inherit it. Alright, so now we want to get our left press working. So now all we need to do is check our check state. So are we checked? And then if we aren't, we want to also handle something there. So this is unchecking. And for unchecking, all we're going to do is we're going to be setting the image index. So we're going to use a sprite that has a bunch of different image index for its different states. So 0 will be unchecked, and then image index 1 will be the checked index. Now we want to make sure that we are reversing the check state. So, oh my gosh, I can't type today. Alright, so checked equals not checked. So that will reverse the state. Okay, so that should be enough to get the left press functionality going. Before we get on with anything else, we want to make sure we have our variable definition set up for our widget. So this is one of the main ways we can configure our widget. And so if we have a look here, we have width, height. So the width and the height we want to set up with 15 by default. Obviously these can be overridden, but the default will say is 15. And then what else will we need? So there's not a whole lot we need for a checkbox right now. It's a very basic demonstration, but that should be enough. Okay, so those are the only two we need, is the width and the height. So now we're going to go ahead and create a sprite for it, and for the sake of the demo I've created a sprite here already for the checkbox, so we don't have to go through the process of creating some kind of a sprite here. So let me just copy these over. So we will copy the first one over. Oops. Well, actually the first thing we need to do is change the dimensions. So we want to make sure it's 15 by 15. And again, these obviously can be however big you want. For the sake of the demo, I'm just showing it at 1515. Simple enough. Okay. So there you go. We have our two states here. And so, okay, so we've created the checkbox. We have our object here. Now let's go ahead and add this custom widget to our panel that we have here. So let's go and create it. So var checkbox, we call widget create, and we pass in obj checkbox. And we don't need to pass in, actually, let's pass in, no, we'll just leave it default. Okay. So now let's add to the menu, oh no, we'll do widget add, and we'll pass in the checkbox, and then the menu, because the menu is the parent. So this will add the checkbox to the parent menu. Okay. So now let's run our sample here, and let's see what it looks like. Oh, I need to position it also. Yeah, so we can't forget to position it, otherwise it's going to appear in the wrong location. Oh, and you know what? We haven't assigned our sprite to our checkbox yet, so let's go ahead and do that. So here it is here. That would also help. Okay. So we want to make sure that our checkbox margin, we'll say margin top, we could just give it a, how big is this with the button? 50, so let's say 65. So this, what we're saying here is we just want the checkbox to be down 65. We have a top margin of 65 so that we can get past the button. Okay, there we go. So we have our checkbox in here now, and it's just sitting underneath the button here. And so when we click it, we should see it change state. There we go. Basic checkbox already set up. And you can see that it's inside of this panel that we have here. So yeah, pretty straightforward. We can have as many of these buttons as we want inside of our panel. So we can just copy pasta this, and we can get as many checkboxes as we want. Obviously, we would have to change the margins, so we would have to say, let's just add 40. We'll say 100, 140, 180. In the future, we're going to make it so that we can have custom grid layouts or like div layouts, very similar to how CSS would work. If anyone here is familiar with web development, we can have those kinds of containerization options, which would be really neat. And should be fairly easy to do. Okay, so now we have a whole bunch of checkboxes inside of our panel, and we can start hooking up events to be called when we're clicking buttons, and we can actually hook into events to listen to certain events on these widgets. And I'll go over how we can do events inside of a different video. Maybe I'll create an events video, and we can go over that as well. So that's all I wanted to demo in this quick little coding session. If anyone has any questions, feel free to leave a comment or create an issue on the repository, and I'll get back to you as soon as I can. And yeah, hope you enjoyed this video. I hope it was helpful for some people, and we'll see you in the next one.